This video is sponsored by Established Titles. Just a few days ago, Grace Randolph of Beyond the Trailer fame insisted that outside of another cameo in The Flash, Henry Cavill had no contract for more appearances, and by extension, no future as Superman. Those tweets did not age well, because despite having earlier committed to and assured everyone he was going to do a full 7 seasons of The Witcher, he just dropped out of that. If you think it's a coincidence that this happened so soon after James Gunn signed up as DC's Kevin Feige, and rumors started swirling that Cavill is back as Superman for the long haul, then I got a bridge to sell you. In this video, we will explore Henry Cavill's long road back to Superman, and to do that, we will begin with him dropping out of The Witcher, which had dropped the ball anyway, before turning our gaze towards DC and what Superman's future may be there. On October 29th, Netflix dropped the official press release stating that Henry Cavill has dropped out of The Witcher from Season 4 onwards, at which point he'll be replaced by Liam Hemsworth. This begs the question though, why? As many have pointed out, juggling Superman and The Witcher shooting commitments should, with some goodwill from each studio, be perfectly achievable. So why drop out of The Witcher, a property which Cavill, a known gamer, has even stated he is a fan of? Well, the aforementioned Grace Randolph offered up that Cavill's management feels that since he just did a Superman cameo, he's Mr. Big Shot now and too good for a crappy little TV series. Even if he took on that crappy little TV series after already having a dedicated film and 2 co-starring roles as Superman on his resume in the first place. But now, after a cameo similar to the one he reportedly declined for Shazam, he's suddenly too good for The Witcher. If you believe this copium, I have another bridge to sell you. But let's go along with it and assume that juggling his Witcher and Superman commitments would be possible, and Grace Randolph certainly seems to think so. What other reason could there be to drop out of The Witcher? The Witcher showrunners were always public about how important it was to them that the story based around Polish folklore and Slavic mythology reflect the world we live in, which in reality means that the showrunners feel it should reflect the postcode in LA where they live, not just in terms of on-screen demographics, but also in terms of socio-political messaging. This included sidelining Henry Cavill altogether, functionally making him but a co-star, while the series instead centered on the female leads. When fans, such as The Quartering earlier this year, expressed disappointment with this creative choice and breach of Witcher canon, writer and producer Lauren Hisrich went into full attack mode on Twitter, all while defending the wild departures from canon with that she liked it. What she presumably did not like was the source material she was supposed to be adapting in the first place. Beau DeMaio, the current head writer of Marvel's upcoming animated revival X-Men 97, used to work on The Witcher, and he revealed that the writers there actively mocked the source material, a mentality which she believes is the death knell of any given production, which is why the writers of his X-Men revival are required to be fans of the original animated series. In other words, he brought up The Witcher only as a contrast and as an example of what not to do. I have long maintained that toxic fans aren't really a thing, and Henry Cavill has, for what it's worth, argued that point too. What is a thing though are toxic creators who project their own toxicity upon a fan base who reject subversive adaptations that were made in bad faith. I submit that that is what The Witcher on Netflix is, a subversive adaptation made in bad faith by toxic creatives. Sure, the series has its fans, but those fans are there for Cavill more so than for what the showrunners have done to the source material. I can only imagine that Cavill's management recognized that continued association with the mockery the showrunners turned The Witcher into with their creative choices would no longer benefit Cavill or his public image. Especially not when the tide is turning over at DC under the lordship of David Zaslav, which we're about to see. But before that, and on the topic of lordship, I am something of a lord myself, and courtesy of Established Titles, this video sponsored, I have the certificate to prove it. Established Titles is a project based around a historic Scottish custom where landowners are referred to as lairds, or lords and ladies in English. Through Established Titles, you can be the owner of at least 1 square foot of dedicated land on a private estate in Edelston, Scotland, which by Scottish tradition makes you a lord or a lady, and you'll get an official certificate with a crest to prove it. This certificate features a unique plot number with which you can see the exact location of your land. But there's more to it. To support worldwide reforestation efforts, Established Titles work with global charities One Tree Planted and Trees for the Future, so for every order, a tree will be planted. This is of course a fun novelty, and it makes for a great gift. In places where prefixes are allowed in official documents, you might even be able to replace Mr. or Miss with Lord and Lady. Established Titles is running a fall sale right now, and if you use our code MIDEDGE10, you get an additional 10% off. Also, Established Titles told me that the first 200 people purchasing a title pack using our link will effectively be next to my plot within a few minutes of walking distance. Depending on how many of you want to become a lord or lady, we can build our little Midnight's Edge kingdom. Go to establishedtitles.com/midedge10 to get your titles now. Link is in the description. With that, let's move on to the Superman side of the equation. Any discussion of DC on film right now has to begin with the previous administration, the post-Snyder regimes at Warner. For years, we've been reporting how they actively did not want either Cavill or Ben Affleck back as Superman and Batman respectively ever again. The initial reason was that Toby Emmerich saw them as the public faces of the Snyder era, and then when Ansarnov stepped in as CEO, they were on top of that also seen as problematic because they were too white, too male, and too masculine, which is neither very diverse nor inclusive. Under these circumstances, it was easy for Cavill to accept taking on The Witcher in the first place, because the executives at Warner did not want him back as Superman. The only reason the severing wasn't complete was because his agent Dani Garcia and her other client, Dwayne Johnson, spent years fighting for Cavill to return and square off against Black Adam. Things shifted when AT&T acquired Warner and took an interest in DC. Like we have been ever since, we were on top of this even back then. Here is what we said more than 2 years ago, on June 5th of 2020, then with the help of Mikey Sutton of Geekosity magazine fame. The reason we are getting the Snyder Cut in the first place is an ongoing tectonic shift of power behind the scenes of DC on film. There are 3 major people of note here. Those 3 are Henry Cavill, The Rock himself, Dwayne Johnson, who has been attached to the role of Black Adam for more than a decade, and Dani Garcia. Dani Garcia is Dwayne Johnson's ex-wife. But their breakup appears to have been an extremely amicable one, because she is his production partner. She runs his production company, which is code for corporate tax shelter, and on top of that, she serves as not just his agent, but Henry Cavill's agent as well. In other words, Man of Steel 2 looks set to have both Henry Cavill's Superman, Dwayne Johnson's Black Adam, and more likely than not, be co-produced by his production company. You know what that translates to?
Lots of money. Play.
That's right, a whole lot of money. They'll fight very, very hard for all of that money. Granted, they've tried doing that for years already, but that wasn't enough before, because they didn't have enough clout with the previous administrations to get either any more Superman or Black Adam projects rolling. But that was before AT&T decided Warner had mucked this up enough and decided to step in. AT&T are heavily invested into the Snyder Cut and his vision for DC. The trio of Garcia, Johnson, and Cavill aligned themselves with that, and now they have clout. Now, pending the reaction to the Snyder Cut, things will be happening. But nothing is yet set in stone. This is a tectonic shift that is still in progress, so expect many more developments and revelations from behind the scenes of DC on film going forward. Now, of course, 2 years later, we know what happened since. Under AT&T, Danny Garcia and Dwayne Johnson were able to gather enough clout to force Black Adam into production, but without Superman, and certainly without Henry Cavill. That's where Emmerich and Sarnoff drew the line, and therefore, so did their puppet, Walter Hamada. But then, there was another tectonic shift in power when AT&T sold off Warner to Discovery. With Discovery came new CEO David Zaslav, and Zaslav just so happened to see DC as Warner's single most important entertainment asset, and so he got rid of those who held it back. As soon as the paperwork had gone through and he had the formal power to do so, he shit-canned on Sarnoff the first thing he did. Emmerich and Hamada were allowed to stay on for a while longer, but the moment Zaslav stepped in, they were in reality out. Hamada was the last to leave. One of the last things he did, according to The Hollywood Reporter, was block the Superman cameo in Black Adam, even if it, at the time, was supposed to feature a headless Superman, like Shazam. But Dwayne Johnson got his way anyway, by going directly to Zaslav appointees Michael DeLuca and Pam Abdi, who overruled Hamada. In the background of all of this, talks were taking place between the new Zaslav regime and with Henry Cavill, whom Zaslav wanted back as Superman. And according to our own Tom Connor sources, talks were also taking place with James Gunn, whom Zaslav wanted to run the entire DC Films operation, as we've covered in several earlier videos and live streams. But neither would commit long-term before everyone involved was in agreement about the overall creative direction. There was, however, enough goodwill and optimism for the way forward that in the 11th hour, Cavill returned for the cameo in Zaslav's re-edited, now more action-oriented and less preachy Black Adam, at which point Dwayne Johnson could no longer keep quiet about what a struggle it was to get Henry Cavill back.
There was a lot of phone calls, but it was also a lot of meetings. There was a lot of face-to-face meetings, and it was a lot of, I can talk to you and my team, Danny Garcia and Hiram Garcia at $7. We could talk to you about how passionate we are about this and why we do feel that this serves not only Black Adam, but it serves the larger DC universe. But man, more importantly than that, it takes care of the fans. And that's what you want your lead foot to be. So, yes, phone calls, meetings, but man, it was years. This was 6 years to get that done. I'm going to say that again. 6 years we first started talking about this, and they kept saying no. Now that leadership isn't there anymore, because we usher in a new era in the DC universe, and we usher out an old era in the DC universe too as well. So 6 years long. That's how long it took.
By this time, Henry Cavill would also already have handed in his resignation to the Witcher production team, because while the public only learned of it now, Netflix knew of it long enough that they already found his Witcher replacement in Liam Hemsworth. It would appear that the Witcher's loss is DC's gain, because while no new deal with Cavill has been formally announced, one has presumably been signed. 2 weeks ago, The Hollywood Reporter confirmed that Man of Steel 2 is in development and looking for a writer, which Collider did the feature story on, while Henry Cavill himself confirmed that he was back as Superman in an October 24th Instagram post. Also on October 24th, Mikey Sutton reported that under everyone's radar and behind closed doors, Ben Affleck had reportedly signed on for an as of yet unannounced Batman trilogy. The day after, quite possibly spurred on by Marvel dropping the trailer for the James Gunn directed Guardians of the Galaxy Christmas special. It was formally announced that James Gunn had signed on as the Kevin Feige of the newly minted DC Studios, which Mikey Sutton has long maintained that Warner's DC operation indeed would be structured in two. While this is speculation based on the assumption that the Affleck scoop is correct, it would stand to reason that David Zaslav, Dwayne Johnson, James Gunn, Henry Cavill, and Ben Affleck have spent months hashing it all out together, and are now in agreement about which creative direction DC should be going and have all signed on to it, although only Gunn so far has been formally announced to the public. Still, this suggests that Marvel better watch their back, because DC just got their proverbial shit together. Courtesy of a new administration that respects the source material and wants to please the fans, DC may indeed become what Marvel used to be. So, who's excited for Season 4 of The Witcher? Let me know your thoughts on all of this in the comments. And before you go, remember that Established Titles is running a big sale right now, and if you use the code MIDEDGE10, you get an additional 10% off. Go to establishedtitles.com/midedge10 now. Link is in the description.